In early 2025, Malaysia reached out to Indonesia with a pressing request. Could they buy rice from their neighbour's stock to ease a domestic shortage? Indonesia's answer was a firm, "Not for now." The Indonesian Agriculture Minister, Andi Amran Sulaiman, explained that Indonesia cannot export rice at this time because it must maintain domestic reserves. This refusal came at a time when Malaysian consumers were grappling with rising rice prices and scarce supplies on store shelves. Does this mean that Malaysia is headed for a food crisis? Well, to understand this, let's first understand why Indonesia does not want to sell rice. What's ironic about Indonesia's "not now" to Malaysia came at a moment when Indonesia's rice outlook was improving. After struggling with poor weather in 2023, the country entered 2025 with a bumper harvest on the way. Officials reported that production in the first quarter of 2025 surged by over 50% compared to the previous year. Favorable rains during the late 2024 wet season meant Indonesian farmers reaped a plentiful main crop. By May 2025, national rice reserves had more than doubled, reaching about 4 million tons, up from just 1.7 million in January. In fact, warehouses were so full that President Prabowo Subianto noted a new logistical challenge of finding space to store the surplus. Given this surplus, President Prabowo took a slightly different tone than his agriculture minister. In late April 2025, he authorized limited rice exports to countries in need, saying Indonesia could share its rice surplus with others as an act of humanity. He emphasized this would not be about profit. Buyers would only need to cover basic costs, not pay sky-high prices. This announcement came just days after the initial refusal to Malaysia. It suggests that Indonesia was open to helping neighbours like Malaysia once it felt its own stocks were secure. Indeed, Vice Minister Sudaryono revealed that at least 2 neighbours, Malaysia and the Philippines, had asked to buy Indonesian rice, and about 1,000 tons were already being prepared for shipment to Malaysia's Sabah and Sarawak states on Borneo. These states in East Malaysia are close to Indonesia's border, so sending a small consignment there made sense once surplus was confirmed. Why the change in tone at the top? It seems Indonesia's leadership was balancing caution with goodwill. The Agriculture Ministry's first response was conservative. Hold all rice until we're absolutely sure of the harvest and climate. But once data showed a record crop and overflowing depots, the presidency signalled readiness to assist allies in moderation. President Prabowo's government still stressed domestic food resilience amid global pressure, but it didn't want to appear indifferent to regional partners' plight either. The outcome is a fine line. Indonesia will only export a relatively small amount, ensuring its rice bowl at home stays full. Now, Indonesia aside, we also need to know why Malaysia is facing a rice supply crunch. Unlike Indonesia, Malaysia has never been self-sufficient in rice beyond roughly the 2/3 mark, and in recent years its domestic production has struggled to keep up with demand. The first reason here is simply because of Malaysia's paddy fields, which have been under pressure. In 2022, local rice production was about 1.57 million tons, down from 1.68 million the year before. Researchers note that domestic rice output has been declining since peaking around 2018. From 2013 to 2021, production fell at an average of 0.7% per year. This drop is attributed to several factors: loss of planted area, plateauing yields, and challenges like rising fertilizer costs. In fact, Malaysia lost about 50,000 hectares of paddy fields over 5 years, partly due to land being converted to housing or other uses. With less land and slightly lower productivity, total output has eroded. As a result of production woes, Malaysia's rice self-sufficiency ratio, SSR, the percentage of demand met by local production, has been trending downward. The national SSR fell from about 63% in 2010 to just 56.2% in 2023. In other words, nearly half of Malaysia's rice needs are now met by imports, By comparison, countries like Indonesia and even land-scarce Philippines manage around 80 to 90% self-sufficiency, highlighting Malaysia's vulnerability. Malaysia's government has set an ambitious goal to reach 80% self-sufficiency by 2030, but current levels leave a wide gap. One big issue is the aging farmer population. Many Malaysian paddy farmers are over 55 years old, and younger generations show little interest in taking up the tough, low-paying work of rice farming. This demographic shift means fewer hands and minds driving innovation in the rice sector. Additionally, changes in land use have hit Malaysia hard, especially in states like Sabah and Sarawak, East Malaysia, where fertile land is ample but not fully utilized for rice. In Sabah, for example, rice self-sufficiency plunged from 32% in 2010 to 22% in 2023 amid population growth and reliance on imports. Nationwide, urbanization and industrial projects have steadily chipped away at paddy acreage. Paradoxically, some well-intentioned policies have backfired on Malaysia's rice output. The government tightly controls the price of locally produced rice, keeping it affordable for consumers, but thereby squeezing profit margins for producers. For instance, ordinary local white rice is capped at 2 ringgit 60 sen per kilogram, which is among the cheapest in the region. Meanwhile, imported white rice floats at market price, which by late 2023 shot up to around 3.90 to 4.0 ringgit per kilogram, about 50% higher than local rice. This huge price gap led to market distortions. When imported rice became too pricey, consumers and even some traders switched to the cheap local rice. There were reports of possible hoarding and even repackaging local rice as imported to sell at higher prices. More fundamentally, the low fixed price for local rice means millers and farmers earn very thin margins. The government does provide subsidies, for example, a guaranteed minimum paddy price, recently raised to 1,800 ringgit per tonne, to support farmers and various input subsidies. But these haven't been enough to spur significant production growth. Analysts argue that Malaysia's price controls have kept production low, as they disincentivize farmers from investing in higher yields or expanding acreage. In short, Malaysia's admirable goal of cheap rice for all has had the side effect of undercutting its own rice industry's viability. Then, by mid-2023 into 2024, Malaysia's rice import dependence turned from a routine fact into an urgent concern. Two main developments converged: global supply disruptions and domestic market turmoil. The first, here, is that in July 2023, India, the world's largest rice exporter, imposed a ban on exports of non-basmati white rice to secure its own food supply amid high inflation. This was a bombshell for importing countries. Malaysia, which typically sourced nearly 40% of its imported rice from India and Pakistan combined, suddenly faced the prospect of losing a huge chunk of supply. Although India later offered Malaysia a special allocation of 170,000 tonnes for the year, Malaysia's government grew concerned it wasn't enough. By March 2024, Malaysia even planned to ask India for an additional 500,000 tonnes of rice on a government-to-government basis. The second here is the squeeze in supply, which led to a sharp surge in rice prices globally. By late 2023, rice prices in key export markets were up 30 to 40% year-on-year, hitting their highest levels in 15 years. Malaysia felt this acutely. The sole licensed importer, Padiberas Nasional Berhad, Bernas, had to pay much higher prices for incoming rice. In September 2023, Bernas announced a 36% price hike for imported white rice, raising it to about 3.90 ringgit per kilogram, from approximately 2.85 ringgit before. This immediately made imported rice far costlier for consumers. And since imported grain accounted for 30 to 40% of Malaysia's consumption, the average household's food budget was hit. Given these factors, Malaysia took several steps to alleviate the crunch, negotiating directly with India, as mentioned, reaching out to other exporters like Vietnam, Thailand, Myanmar for supply, and introducing subsidies to offset import costs in East Malaysia. Now, against this backdrop, it's easier to see why Malaysia turned to Indonesia. By early 2025, Malaysia had scoured its traditional sources. Thailand and Vietnam were selling rice but at elevated prices. India was largely off-limits except for special quotas. Other exporters like Pakistan or Myanmar are much smaller players. Indonesia, meanwhile, had started to boast of a rice surplus. But anyway, do let us know what you think. Thanks for watching.